Hello, thank you for watching. My name is Paola Di Maio. I am speaking today in the context of political abuses of psychiatry about psychological coercion and mental health, a systems view. I want to thank the organizer, thank you, Enric, for the opportunity to um, present some views and commentaries on some very important issues that are concerning us all. Again, Paola Di Maio. I'm a research scholar with the Ronin Institute. I'm also a member of IGDOR. In this talk, I expand the canonical perspective. I try to expand the canonical perspective on the subject of political or abuses of psychiatry to include wider cases of psychological abuse. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is that not only we are looking at political abuses of psychiatry or psychiatry abuses for political means, but also um, psychological abuse. This should be viewed in the context of wider, much more widespread political and psychological abuse. Coercion and illegal means are used to manipulate society and individuals by unknown agencies. So this is a reality that we are facing. There are dynamics which are seeded, are constructed into our systems. And then I am presenting this uh, topic in the context of artificial intelligence information technology. So, in the title, I say, okay, a systems view. What is a systems view? Here I use an illustration from a system thinking published in a journal. Um, Creative Commons reuse permitted. To show that the systems view is one that exposes systemic complexity, dependencies, a lot of dynamics going on, and these dependencies may be also hidden, not apparent. So here they're visible, represented by arrows, but um, actually a lot of these dynamics may not be immediately discernible. There are paradoxes. So it's a complex system is contains conflicting truths. So two things which are not coinciding or not in agreement, two axioms or facts or aspects of realities may coexist and they both be true, even if they are not aligned. So system view, complex system view, taken as a whole, can be mind-wrecking. Um, Complexity in as it is exposed by a system view, these complexities can actually be exploited. So people say, oh yeah, this is because of that. But in fact, there could be design, abuse could be designed to fit or appear as complex dynamics when it is not. So this only a systems thinker can see that, how that is done. Mm, so political and psychological abuse, psychiatric and psychological abuse, does not just take place in certain regimes or in political circumstances. It can be subtle, go undetected, and it can be very widespread. There are no instruments to identify and address psychological abuse. It can be very complex, it can have various layers of complexity, layers of agency, layers of abuse, a lot of things going on all together in the system. Layers of coercion, layers of psychology, they're all entangled. It aims to create psychological instability. So, psychological abuse aims to create instability, insecurity in individuals that may have, individuals to say who, individuals that may have the potential to bring change or otherwise not conforming to stereotypes. In the talk, I will briefly try to characterize who could be the targets of psychological abuse and why, and the motives. It can be devastating. So, political abuses of psychiatry is well defined: misuse of psychiatry, including diagnosis, detention, and treatment, for the purpose of obstructing the human rights of individuals and or groups. The abuse of psychology in coercion and manipulation is more subtle, so psychological abuse is much less well defined and much more common. Psychological abuse can have huge impact on mental health of individuals and communities. Indicatively, the contents of this talk will cover mapping the complexity, trying to say that complexity itself can make people mentally unwell or uncomfortable. Um, Complexity can drive anyone insane. It really does challenge our cognitive limits. Widening the context, so I'm trying to say, okay, psychiatric abuses for political aims do belong to a wider um, spectrum of psychological abuses, which is much more common and subtle and less visible. Examples of psychological abuse techniques in use. I discuss some of the ways this is done. The role of artificial intelligence and information systems. Um, and we'll see, how sometimes complexity can or must be handled, pointing to future work. So I'm a research about me. I'm a researcher in information technology primarily. As the information technology became more complicated, I started studying complex systems, in particular socio-technical systems. Socio-technical systems are much more complex than technical systems, by the way, because of the psychology. And I apply my understanding of systems to a wide range of fields, including complementary health, complementary medicine, and this is where mental health becomes also part of my uh, fields of application. But mental health really is relevant to everyone. Is not just mental health is not something abstract. Everything depends on our mental health, even our ability to stay alive from morning to evening. Because the moment we lose our mental health or balance, um, we start posing a risk to ourselves. Like, you can put foot wrong because your cognition has wobbled in that moment, or you have not been 100% lucid and cause harm or even die. So mental health, your ability to stay balanced and centered, is relevant to everyone, and in particular to researchers, because researchers can easily get lost in the complexities. In particular, mental health is relevant to complex systems researchers, I must say, but is also relevant to the mm, information systems engineers and designers, because information systems are models of information processing and cognition. So, what we learn from psychology and mental health um, applies to information systems. I hope you appreciate the circularity of mental health with information systems. The topic of today's talk and the topic of the context is actually interesting to me because it has a lot of societal implications as a citizen, as a researchers in privacy, human rights, and the research and scholarship. So what I do and what we do as researchers must serve humanity, must be used to serve humanity and help to solve problems. I would like to apologize in advance for the poor, uh, for possible sounds in the background and some imperfection in the recording or in the slides. Hopefully, this is going to be audible enough and clear enough. So, general disclaimer, not everyone may be able to immediately make sense of everything in this talk. The talk only introduces some main points for discussion. It does not exhaust them. Take what you can. It takes a lot of homework to get the big picture, and once you get the big picture, you may need some counseling. So there is a direct correlation between complex systems, system view, and mental health. Complex systems, once understood and processed in their entirety, or as completely or as extensively as required sometimes, can exceed the ability, the cognitive and emotional ability to cope. Um, so, I mean, this is supposed to be a joke, but it's also quite true. Although serious, the dramas that we touch upon when we discuss psychological abuses, they're very serious, but there is a potentially a bit of a funny side, which may be funnier to some than to others. The context, in theory, we live in a civilized information society, promoting ethical values, openness, transparency, civic responsibility, progressive thinking, human rights, all of this. This is supposed to be what human society is doing nowadays, but in reality, um, everyone is potentially the target of aggressive adversarial tactics, such as information theft. We are potential targets of information theft for the purpose of commercial um, aims, advertising, or someone is trying to sell us something or influence our consumer behavior. But they're also politically used to establish certain dynamics and narratives and to influence behavior and psychologies of groups of individuals. In the talk, we're going to look at some of the methods that psychological abuse is carried out. So, we have seen in the context of this workshop that there are cases, and in literature also, we've seen in literature there is well documented cases of mm, abuses of psychiatry in political context from the USSR and China and in totalitarian regimes. But to bring balance, we should also look at but to bring balance to this view, there is abuse of psychiatry in history, throughout history. For example, the Nazis were experts, but also South Africa during apartheid, Yugoslavia, Somalia, Sudan, just to bring up some names. And we must acknowledge that human history is built on abuse, war, genocide, murder, deceit. So there's been no country, or very few countries and parts of history, which have been exempt from abuse. Psychiatric and psychological abuses are part of this agenda. So, interestingly, the perpetrators of psychological crimes today do not leave traces, however, for history to learn from. So, interestingly, I think we should note, in addition to the well known examples, the examples of psychiatric abuse in the Nazi era, there is some excellent body of work. Here, I only note a couple of papers by Mr. Rael Strauss, who documents systematically in a very humane way what has happened in psychiatry, how psychiatry was used by the Nazis. Worth reading. So abusers nowadays can be found in any race, ethnicity, religion, country. Political abusers tend to commit crimes in the open. So This is the party, this is the ruling party, this is the political agenda, and this is they're going to use psychiatry to get rid of their opponents. So this is relatively straightforward. But psychological abusers commit crimes without leaving any trace, often covering up, disguising their tracks very carefully, or even using moral and legislative grounds as justification. So they actually think they're doing everyone a favor by abusing. Obviously, this is a deviated view, but it's very widespread. And um, a common trait among abusers is that they rely on the acquisition of personal information, which then they leverage and misuse to pursue their goals. They may well be educated, have key positions. They could be scientists, researchers, influencers, TV personalities. They could be deviated intelligence. So deviated intelligence is like, people who acquire information illegally and use it to coerce and manipulate, hinder, and harm. Now, we're not talking about the legitimate use of intelligence here, but there is a very thin line, and who knows, and it's very difficult to tell. This is part of the problem in understanding psychological abuse when it's done in a covert way. So, psychological abusers have hidden agendas and can exhibit any of the following extreme. They can be extremist, manipulative, overt, make use of surveillance. They may be informants, and they may even be informants without their knowledge. They may not know. They're just someone is piggybacking on them. We will see why in a moment. So one of the other common traits is that they're completely unethical and dishonest. So they do not need permission to acquire and misuse information. They use drugs. They will drug a subject that they want to extract information from. They may torture or maybe simply deceive. They will tell them something to make them say something that then they're gonna use or misuse rather. So, but the acquisition of information is unlawful, or obtained using deceit or torture or unlawful means. They use information out of context. So they will only use the part of the information that they're interested in using. They're not going to use information in a more complete and set. They're going to only take things out of context to make their point. They hide, do not disclose how the information is acquired, for example, especially when it's acquired illegitimately. So, especially say, oh yeah, we gave them a drug, and that's how we know this. And they wouldn't say that. They use the information that they have acquired to make a subject psychologically unstable, and this is the criminal part. So, they really not only acquire information unlawfully, which is bad enough, but they will also use that information to destabilize and affect the mental health of the individual. They do not care about the emotional and mental health. In fact, they, on the contrary, they are using the information that they acquire to uh, uh, carry out psychological abuse. They say that that is precisely what they do. They try to influence people's psychology, mental state, and emotional state. And they do not see the problem with psychological abuse at all. They think it's perfectly fine. So, which is the most dangerous? Totalitarian regime that lock up individuals, dissenters, to psychiatry wards using psychiatry. So there is cruelty to individual for a political motive. This is quite clear, and the agency is known. We know it's the regime or it's the junta who's doing that to the particular individual, and why. We know they're doing it because they disagree with their political views. We also have societies that elevate psychopaths to leadership positions. They reward unethical people or unworthy people, and they elevate them. We know that who's doing it sometimes. And in later on in the talk, we're looking at the motives. We also know why sometimes, but the agency is known. society, you know. Um, Hitler was elected democratically, I hear. Or, so which is most dangerous? The totalitarian regime that locks up the dissenter, or the society that elevates psychopaths and makes them into leader and saying how good they are? Or, which is the case that interests me most, the use of psychology, surveillance, to gather intelligence and use it in such a way to cause mental illness to an individual, for a range of motives that we're going to look at later, whereby the agency is unknown. So we don't know, there is no way of telling who's doing it, but we know that it takes place. So, which of these is the most dangerous? For me, the case which is the most dangerous because it's the most subtle and undetectable is here. Talking about agency, is someone really out there to get you? Well, sometimes circumstances can be mind wrecking, so things go wrong all at the same time without anyone in particular orchestrating it. We accept that the world sometimes doesn't work the way we expect it to, or the universe is trying to tell something, or everything is wrong. This is all accepted, but sometimes we can be sure that someone is out there uh, to get you, in the sense of someone is trying to um, carry out psychological coercion. For example, you go somewhere and someone is looking at their phone and is saying, "Oh, you know," when you arrive, they say, "Oh, your fame precedes you," and you can see that they've received the message on the phone, and they look at you and they say, "Oh, I just received a message about you, and you're famous," and so on and so on. Then, okay, you ignore that and you say, "Well, I don't know who it is, what he's trying to say." But then when you go to another place, that happens to another place with another person. Someone else is saying, "Oh, your fame precedes you," and they receive a message on their phone. So, if this happens repeatedly, then you can be sure that there is someone who is intercepting your movements, who has information about you, and they are making sure that you know that they have information about you, and that they are sharing it or spreading it using some communication means. And this is likely to drive somebody mad. It is likely to have an impact on somebody's well-being and mental health if it happens uh, more than once. Once could be a joke, bad joke. When it happens repeatedly in multiple contexts with different consequences, at different levels of risk, um, exposing the person involved in the bad joke, different levels of risk, then it becomes a crime. So there is a chapter called Paranoia versus Reasonable Suspicion. So when are you paranoid, and when you're just being alerted that there is maybe something going on. This is something for everyone to uh, become aware of. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that they aren't after you. This is a important thing to remember, and we have to apply discernment, allowing for multiple scenarios. So it could be that, the world is a difficult place and things go wrong all at the same time, and someone is uh, spying on you and using the information they acquire about you to play a bad joke and try to psychologically coerce you into whatever is it you need to figure out that they're trying to do and why. But it's all illegal. So, what mental health? Sensitive, intelligent people and emotionally vulnerable people. Everyone is emotionally vulnerable. The official figure that I found, I don't know which year, it says that 5% of the world population use antipsychotic drugs, but we know for a fact that it's actually many more. Everyone going to work in the city in London, New York, or Tokyo is likely to need to take some medication at some point to keep their sanity. So everyone, the society, life conditions, society are very repressive, very threatening. Everyone suffers from some degree of psychological abuse, and to cope, people take medicine really to make them accept and not be too distressed and live and function under certain conditions. So some individuals may be more vulnerable than others. In particular, we have neurodiverse people, people with enhanced perception or different degrees of cognition, intelligence, IQ. Um, so the unknown deviated adversarial agency, these people that we don't know who they are, they actually know how to exploit their vulnerabilities. So they are criminals, and they know how to exploit your vulnerability to crack you. So this is they do not hesitate. They're professionals. Mm, Psychological abuse and coercion are observable, but they often go undetected. So because because psychological abuse is fabricated by someone that we don't know in a way that is not always obvious, it takes quite a lot of detective work to see it. And normal people have got other concerns. They have to go about their life to stay alive themselves. They don't have time to go and study who is playing which game, which psychological game with whom and why. So it gets ignored, and but also because abusive and coercive behavior is built in the fabric of society throughout history. So entire countries, empires have been built on abuse and coercion. So what's new? Companies, corporations, stock market. It's all designed to function with that abusive and coercive dynamic. So this is just the world we're looking at. So we're there is certain accepted that psychological abuse is okay, and this actually cannot be seen or is not understood, not studied, not um, it's kind of accepted also. Nobody has a problem, or a few people have a problem, but I have a problem. But I don't really know who I want to talk to about it. So this is why today I jumped at the opportunity of giving a talk on the subject. Modern society is evolving to understand that psychological abuse may be a problem. It's not healthy, but it hasn't figured out how to address it yet. So the use of psychiatric and psychology for political aims does not just take place in totalitarian regimes. This is what I'm trying to bring out today. Political use of psychiatry can benefit from being understood in a wider context of psychological manipulation. So psychiatry, political use of psychiatry is just an aspect of a wider problem of psychological abuse. And I'm suggesting that a library of wider representative cases of psychological abuse, including psychiatric abuse, can be useful to expand this perspective. So, examples of psychological manipulation techniques: gaslighting, confounding, mind wrecking, intimidation, peer pressure, cognitive dissonance, misrepresentation. They're all reasonably well understood, and they're used to reduce confidence, create disorientation, demotivate, promote disengagement, ultimately manipulate the individual and the group, the community that the individuals belong to. Um, Apart from peer pressure, which is quite common, I'm briefly presenting this technique, gaslighting, also called coercive control, referred to referred to as extreme psychological manipulation to commit an individual to a psychiatric institution or cause mental illness with an intent to brainwash. Literature identifies four types of gaslighting, which I didn't have the time to present, but anyone can look them up and discuss them. Cognitive dissonance, psychological cognitive phenomenon, discomfort a person feels when their behavior does not align with their values or beliefs, or discomfort arising from the conflicting information. So cognitive dissonance can lead to mind and personality split and schizophrenia. So what I think we should remember is that cognitive dissonance is a response to conflicting information or conflicting conflict between information and behavior, and it can be a fact of life. Like it's not necessarily deliberately inflicted by any agency. So that's the way things are in the world, and it may impact some individuals more than others, and we may have to cope and learn how to cope with cognitive dissonance in our lives, to recognize it and cope. Doxography is a technique used to harmonize information where it's discordant, to make it more acceptable, to make the narrative and the presentation of a certain fact or set of facts more harmonious and more homogeneous. However, doxography can be abused to to influence acceptance of certain narratives which are deliberately false. So once you provide, so one of the coping mechanisms for of human beings when they're confronted with cognitive dissonance is to bridge and to create a version of the, the reality which is uh, not only processable from an information processing viewpoint but also emotionally acceptable. So there are certain things which are really too disturbing, and either we learn how to ignore them or to live with them, and sometimes to create a version of reality which bridges the discordant bits is done. But in psychological abuse, can use these techniques or techniques based on doxography to persuade and manipulate. So confounding, in statistics, confounding factors are unrelated associations. So we know that in a given set of, there is a set values, and some of these values may not be logically consistent or not belong or not be useful to the analysis. Therefore, they are considered confounding factors, and there are several statistical techniques to identify and remove the confounding factors or handle them, or sometimes to use them to obtain or manipulate certain results. So confounding has a role in statistics, but in psychological manipulation, confounding is actually used to cause surprise or confusion, or to mix up reality. So uh, psychological abuse uses confounding techniques to create confusion in the mind of the person they're targeting, and um, and this is done routinely. Now, confounding again can be a fact of life. So we know that some reality is conflicting, and truth can be confounded. So if there are multiple truths which are not aligned or not harmonized, but they're all true. So these are paradoxes. These things exist. There are a lot of things, which is a lot of examples. You have criminals who are charitable donors. You have people who intend to harm, and they show kindness to get your trust. You have family members, friends, or associate who play emotion with your emotions because they're insecure, and you do not know what to make of the situations and become emotionally unstable yourself once you realize. So we need to learn how to recognize and accept this, confounding factors in the real world. So it's not necessarily inflicted or designed. It can confounding exist, can be injected, can be created to politically abuse and manipulate, but can also be just a natural thing. Mind wrecking. Mind wrecking is a deliberate technique, so whereby the psychological abuse is inflicted deliberately. So there are several examples which are not discussed here, but stalking, intercepting, fabricating circumstances, or negating the truth, or obliging to conform to certain behaviors which are not logical or not in line with with acceptable values, and a number of other things. They're all designed to mind wreck people. Uh, um, Generally, tampering with information or behavior to cause distress. That this is done deliberately, and this is criminal. It's criminal, but there are no instruments to handle mind-breaking practices which are routinely adopted by abusers in a variety of circumstances, including schools, public schools, or a workplace, or administrations. They all happen. This mind-breaking happens behind closed doors. Nobody will know this is happening. It's never documented. You only know that you get out of the meeting or out of the room and your mind is split and you don't know what to make of what just happened or how to react. And very often this disorientation is moment of disorientation is used to make you do or say something that is not what you would normally do or say. So once a person, an individual knows that a certain circumstance is not natural or not right, then mind wrecking occurred. They're in a situation which cannot possibly be, and they don't know what to make of it or how to respond. Then, on a if this continues or it's kind of becomes a normality, then people become paranoid, schizophrenic, or at least very nervous, unable to function normally, may start suffering from cognitive impairment, possibly somatize or become ill. Even some limbs may start shrinking. So there is a way to say that your mind or mental health or mental well-being uh, leaves visible traces leaves an imprint on the brain, and the brain in turn controls the rest of the body. So sometimes certain malfunctions or dysfunctions appear in the body that are attributable directly to mm, emotional distress, which is attributable directly to some kind of inflicted, deliberate circumstance which has been created. This is currently under research. So, adversarial tactics. So, the psychological abusers may not be your friends, but they can be nice to you. So you actually, in a classical mind reading sense, you don't know what to make of them. They're nice, but they may have ulterior motives for being nice. So, uh, reminds me of the what is it called, the big bad wolf. The wolf which disguises as a grandma and is really nice and says, "Oh, come here," but he just wanted to eat you. So these psychological abusers, when I say they, I normally refer to psychological abusers. They're expert in criminal intelligence. They know how to target, weaken, and crush their targets. They know their subjects, but they giving the appearance that they're trying to help. And they're highly trained and use every possible means to achieve their goals, which is to obliterate your will in some cases or your position or get you out of the picture. They're professionals. They do not care about the mental stability and human rights. They're experienced and they know how to hide their tracks. So they will often commit some crime and then pretend that they didn't. In fact, you did. They use, distort, manipulate, and they have your friend's back. This is an important point. So very often they control your social network in some way because everyone depends on everyone, on everything else. If they cannot get to you directly, or when they cannot, or even when they can, they will always ensure that people around you will be they can influence people around you, whether it's friends or family. They form a front. Now, this thing is very interesting of how um, the the political abusers on scale, when they act in an organized way, they they form a front. Like they know how to create. a view of reality that is consistent through. So for example, there is the case of the woman who rejected a specific the acceptance of a specific individual who turned up at her doorstep demanding attention, and she didn't open the door. But the next day, none of her friends would say hello to her. Everyone would just look away, and and she couldn't figure out what was going on until she realized that this person was particularly influential and has managed to cut her off from society because she did not accept 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 opening the door without this person being particularly announced. And so, and this is an example, but there are other examples of society punishing you as a whole for some behavior that society considers unacceptable. And it is the wolf pack tactics, like, like the tribe. Whenever somebody disobeys the rules of the tribe, the person this person becomes is not accepted by the tribe anymore, and they have to go and live on their own, uh, and fend for themselves. So this is a very animal social behavior, um, of using the social network to agree on a line and then sustain it. Very often, this is used as a form of psychological abuse. So society is not fair, can be unfair. Um, the target may not be a person, so it's not necessarily the person that they're targeting, but what they represent. In the case of the woman, is that the woman represents independence, and the woman saying no to somebody in power is not considered acceptable. Is considered too bold, and therefore, well, maybe it was not the woman that was the target, but what she stood for. Women independence and their ability to accept or reject uh, the visit. And But it can also be social change. So maybe the target of the political of the psychological abuse is not necessarily that person, or that what is their value, but the fact that this person would influence or bring change. So the honeypots case is very interesting. So they psychological abusers create simulations which they control, distort, and manipulate. So, for example, in the case of researchers, someone organizes a workshop or a journal issue, and then when the person who's done the researcher is a pioneer in that submits their work, it gets rejected. And then instead, they accept the work of somebody who has plagiarized the original work. And when the plagiarism case is made, they say, oh, mm, there is no evidence of plagiarism. So what they're saying is counterfactual, is not true, and they're putting the burden of proof on the legitimate researcher, supposedly. And so obviously anyone in that circumstance would become demoralized and mind wrecked and would just give up. I personally know a lot of researchers who have given up being researchers because they have been psychologically abused by the research establishment. And there is an interesting group called 21% which has been set up recently to tackle bullying in academia, which is worth looking up. 21%.org. Another case of honeypot abusers plagiarize. They invite the author to submit evidence of plagiarism. So first they plagiarize. Then they contact the person who's been plagiarized and said, "Oh, we have a lawyer that can help you. Send us the evidence." And when they have the evidence, they use the evidence to file a defamation case against the legitimate author. So not only they, how do you say it? They abuse him psychologically, and then they damage him materially, because this is all part of some kind of criminal activity that is quite common. in academia. Um, so this case is a multiple agency case. So, for example, the person who invited the author to submit evidence did not know that there was somebody that he himself had been instigated by someone who has the intention to file a defamation case. But he was just part of a network, and they said, "Oh, get this person to submit their evidence to this website." And when the person who's already been psychologically abused by being plagiarized says, "Okay, I'll submit the evidence," they submit the evidence and it's used against them. The person who suggested they submit the evidence may have not necessarily known that this is what's going to end like that. So it can become very complex, can become very sensitive, and it takes place across multiple jurisdictions, effectively making the psychological abusers operate above and beyond the law, well above and beyond. There is nobody can ever figure this out, basically. They isolate and alienate their target, and through networks of social influence. I would say disinformation exchange and persuasion, resource diversion. Resource diversion is very important. They will intercept anyone who is trying to support or promote the work of the target, and they will convince them not to engage with this person on whatever ground they have, using whatever social network influence they have. They will intercept the resource and divert it. So they will say, okay, if you need to work with somebody, work with this person that we know is really good, da, da, da. And simply resources get diverted. And the target of the political abuse remains isolated and without resources, sometimes for sustained periods of time. This happens to many legitimate researchers. To information, the abusers can cause systematic isolations. They weaken social and economic positions. The abuse can impact perception, cognition. Individual can start losing touch with reality, lose their home, access their finances, they forget their password, and things start to go seriously wrong. The social and technical system, the systemic deviation takes place, and it can be defined as a behavioral and functional shift of a system from its intended purpose. So hospitals that kill patients, law enforcement agencies which do not enforce the law, quite the opposite. States and governments run by insiders who operate on behalf of privates. Democracies governed by elites. Media disseminating disinformation, very common, and a lot more. Progressive movements which are actually set up to stir and drive repression. So they're saying, oh, we are trying to do open science, but in fact they are doing the opposite. Mm, I wrote an article on systemic deviation. The purpose of the article was to identify, characterize this phenomenon, and then found out that there are, many examples, like the examples which I mentioned before. Here, I just bring up these examples, but I found an example in the whistleblowing community. So whistleblowers are those who expose these cases of mm, abuse in organizations, and there's some of the whistleblowing protection organizations actually have been set up to catch the whistleblowers and expose them. And by the way, I'm part of a whistleblowing network, which people may join here if they're interested. Um, so something that we can learn from the World War II is how the Nazis manipulated victims into cooperation. So they managed to get um, Jewish people to work for them in various roles. And one thing which I want to say is that, first of all, this happens a lot in psychological abuse. They get particular individuals to operate or cover certain roles which are cooperating even, and the abuse is carried out by cooperants, not by abusers themselves. They're just creating the schemes, but someone else is carrying out the abuse. They get other people to get their hands dirty. And in the case of this Nazis here, what they did is that they didn't give the person a choice. They would either cooperate or they would go, or they would get gassed or burned, murdered. And so, it's not that history is blaming the cooperants and is saying, oh, they cooperated. That's really shameful. Well, maybe they didn't know. I know it because I've benefited from first-hand accounts of people who lived in the last war, World War II, and they were very clear. They said either I got to work for the fascist party or I would die. There was no choice. Some people could choose to die, or they managed to escape, but not everyone could because they had children, maybe, or because they didn't have a leg, they couldn't run. So whatever, So there were a lot of people who had to cooperate, and some people cooperated for convenience because it made their lives more comfortable, which is human nature. So I'm saying that history is condemning these situations, but this is happening a lot. Psychological abuse. Someone will hire you and they will hire one of your colleagues, and then they will promote your colleague to carry out psychological abuse on you, and they will blackmail your colleague that if they don't carry out the psychological abuse, they will also lose their privileges or their jobs or their salary. This is very common, carried out routinely. There are documented cases. So, so yes, they have your friends and family's backs. They know how to manipulate social networks. They make psychological abuse just be part of the way things are. We need to evolve methods to identify and address this social manipulation and influencing. So it's not just the manipulation of the social network, which is vicious and horrifying, it's also the way they first attack and then, so like they do some wrongdoing. Mm, extort information or get you to do something wrong, or they rob you or they manipulate in some way, and then they, talking about the psychological abusers, say that you attack them, they're specialists, to create a crime and then accuse someone else of it. So this is very common in universities. They hire you and then they ask you to do something wrong, and when you say no, I'm not doing it, they say, oh, then we'll sack you because you were disrespectful, or because you were unethical, because you did something wrong. So this is, I've seen it, and in particular, I've seen how some people, you see how all these techniques are used in conjunction. So they hire someone who is in a lower position, either he's a junior or he's got less experience or less qualification, and they put it on top of you, control you. They then elevate the junior to a higher position in a political hierarchy or organizational hierarchy, and then they blackmail the junior to say get them to do this. So they rely on snipers. So they have individuals who cover certain roles. And this also explains why so many unethical people or incompetent people are successful, or they're in positions of power. You ever wonder why there are so many idiots in place in organizations who cover positions of power? Because they play the role of psychological abusers. They have a bureaucratic role to perform to carry out and execute the psychological abuse and other forms of abuses which are not psychological. But mm, So, by using these examples, I intend to bring a wider perspective on political abuse and of psychiatry and psychological abuse, and point to some of the systemic complexities. It is not only governments that use psychology and psychiatry to contain and or obliterate or wipe out opponents. It can actually be anyone. It could be even a family member or a colleague. Given the right mindset, so they need to be adversarial, unethical, and they need to have the right motive. Um, and sometimes, even some people carry out psychological abuse with a good intention, even. They think that's the way these people operate. This is the way they've been brought up to abuse. They don't realize, they think they're maybe even doing something good for you by coercing you to follow a certain avenue that they think is the right one. So here finally we get to the information and knowledge society. So society is uses psychology and a lot and they use psychology to impact the mental health and well-being of individuals and steer narratives. So who are these abusers, these psychological abusers? They are either coalitions of individuals that manipulate society, a la echelon, I don't know how to pronounce it, at the highest level. It could be, that there is someone who has access to everybody's information and they know how to use it. They can spy, they can obtain information, they can use it to make or break an individual. They can give this person the best job in the world and make them rich and famous. They can also crush them and destroy them and make them miserable and crazy. But they can also be just friends and family, clueless individuals, people who don't know. They're just doing, they're just part of, they go with the flow. They could be individuals in good faith because manipulating reality has always been part of what they've been brought up to do, or it could be some people who have a good reason. They may not realize that manipulation can have an impact on somebody's well-being. Uh, it could be someone who loves you, a powerful, disgruntled suitor who is using this network of friends to make their target unstable so that they will seek their protection or they will consider their proposal or whatever. Um, they could be deviated part of law enforcement agencies. We know that unfortunately every organization has its dark side. Could be opponents in business, competitors, people who are envious, people who may have something to gain. Society is made up of dishonest people, people who are just evil, like they take pleasure in causing harm, like the children who torture frogs. Could be some idiot, a bully. It could be someone who's trying to prevent you from changing the world. So this is a very interesting case of if you are right, if you are not crazy, if you stand for something which turns out to be true and prove everything else potentially wrong, then you are a target of psychological abuse. They're gonna come and get you. They're gonna take you down. They're not gonna let you do it because they're trying to preserve the order, the established order of things, the way history and the world have always been. So you may wonder how come the world is in this state, and it is in this state because through psychological abuse we've been fooled history and people are being deceived routinely. This is one of the reasons why I think this talk is important to me to bring this out. I figured this. Uh, Variety of scenarios. So these psychological abusers are sometimes even good guys who do the wrong thing for whatever reason. It could be people who are clueless. There are a number of scenarios, and somebody is trying to harm you with this information that they gather. Somebody may not try to harm you. They just have information and that's it, and they're not using it or using it correctly. But there are people who are super parties, like they have ways of influencing the wrongdoers to harm you, and they have ways to influence the people who are, say, enforce the law, and so to protect you or to make sure these people don't harm you. But they themselves are not visible. They are, how do they say, behind the scenes, and they have the ability to influence either these scenarios, and they are I think the most dangerous people, the ones who, because they pull the strings whatever way they it suits them. They are not accountable. They are not visible, and they're the ones that nobody is gonna ever catch. And that there is no method, no research, no system view that will ever. But we know that they exist because their influence is visible. Um, when you create a system where certain dependencies are made visible, then you know, well, if this happens, it means somebody must have been there to tell them. And sometimes this influence is, as you say, benevolent. Like, you have an informant who warns you. They come out and say, watch your back. They watch your back. Someone will say, okay, I'm going to try. I'm going to tell you that somebody is going to stab you. Run. And that's okay. But sometimes the same people are the ones who are actually going to set up the study, and you will never really know. You only, because all you could do at that time was run, and these are the people where this is where evil is resides a lot, because it's not visible. It's not their motives and their dynamics are not apparent. So why are these psychological abusers doing this? They consider that psychological abusers are considering your worldview unacceptable. They just think that you cannot possibly exist, or even if you do exist, you should not. Oh my gosh, I've lost it. They You should not be allowed to influence us with these ideas, because maybe they've seen you at work and they see that when you say something that is true, and truth is exciting, and it will change people's minds and behavior. Then they say, no, not this person. This gotta get out of the picture ASAP, and they make sure you never influence anybody. In some cases, they're just following orders. A lot of the psychological abusers, actually, they're just doing what they're told. Very common. Majority of people in this world do as they're told, or as they're persuaded. They're told, they're informed, they're built to operate in a certain way. They're indoctrinated, basically. And this indoctrination is very relevant in the case of the psychiatric abuse for political aid. So basically, we don't know whether it's the communism, it's the fascism, or we're just indoctrinated to believe that a certain view is right. And then we uphold that view, and we will pursue to establish that view without being critical. So this is why being critical. But in some cases, a lot of people are just following what they're just doing what they're taught. In some cases, they're doing what they're ordered or told. But in some cases, they're just doing what they have been convinced that is the right thing to do, whether they're wearing the red scarf or whether they're wearing the black scarf. Sometimes it's economic, financial, ideological motives. Sometimes they're doing your political abusers just systematically want to eradicate certain views from society because they would bring change, as in the case of Nikola Tesla, but also in the case of religious or political figures. Um, when people start acting out of their own uh, individual mindset, they can become dangerous and disruptive, and so they are targeted. But also just because of general ignorance, because of bullying is accepted, there is cruelty in society, Somebody wants something you have. This world has been dominated by brigands and robbers. Nobody's safe. Very few places. Whenever you have, whether your intelligence and invention or happiness or your smile, they want to rob you of that. They want to control your mind. Um, they're angry, or just they're angry. They're just angry, and they manifest their anger by carrying out abuses on others. So these are some of the motives that are easily identifiable. There may be others. So we're looking at psychological warfare to break the will to fight, to render a person favorably disposed to one's position. Brainwashing. So it's an established practice, well understood. So information communication are directly responsible for behavior. Psychological abuse depends on information. In social systems, this has been done by policy, rumor spreading, gossip, false information, deceit, or even by legislation. In the age of social networks, it is even easier to manipulate information networks. Now there is technology. In artificial intelligence, one of my fields of practice is knowledge representation, which is a long story to discuss, but basically, misrepresentation consists of labeling true content or truth as false, or saying that something true is false, or saying something that is false is true. And this is misrepresentation is used in all of the techniques that we have looked at earlier, but also used in AI. And then again, a long body of work will follow on misrepresentation. Um, AI can be used to reinforce psychological abuse in many ways. In many ways, there is a good paper here which suggests, as a starting point, there is a interesting body of literature. So, in some occasions, this is very important. It isn't there could be agencies, so there could be somebody trying to drive you mad by acquiring information about you and manipulating it to making you aware that somebody's watching you, or by simply influencing your behavior, your social network, to talk to you or not talk to you, or plagiarize you or not plagiarize, whatever. But in increasingly, there is algorithms who are doing so. We should be aware that in many cases is the information network from which we depend, like Google Mail, Gmail, Google Search, YouTube. All of these are somehow orchestrated to function based on information that you give, like your keyword searches. Give searches. Google picks up your search terms and creates a view of the world that adapts to your inquiry and to your curiosity, and then you start becoming a little bit, eventually, maybe you're not being spied on, but your perception is and worldview is being wrapped around you by an algorithm. And this is something we should be. So we don't know to what extent somebody, when we use information technology, there is a very fine line between someone spying on you, which could be the case, and actually a system being designed to extract information from you, throw it back to you, uh, uh, to build a model of the world around you and your expectations and your own region. So, but there is a very big psychological component in how this happens. Going back to the chapter, we should always look at the. We should not forget to balance the possible paranoia? Is it real? Is it someone speaking my mind deliberately, or is this just happening because that's the way things are? And we should be aware of that and possibly accept that both can be true. Handling complexity. So the more we understand, the bigger the picture we get, then the more vulnerable we are to mental health um, vulnerabilities and crisis. So sometimes the reality is so complex, and sometimes reality is so painful that um, we either find coping mechanisms, or we we suffer from uh, mental unwellness. Luckily, in information technology and in complex systems, we have frameworks that help us to handle complexity. I just point to one of the first frameworks that became popular by David Snowden. This was, however, many years ago, maybe more than 20. So by now, maybe this is not enough as complexities have increased. We have causal loops, diagrams that can help us navigate complexities. Uh, but there are many more frameworks to handle complexity depending on the case. Again, I don't have time to discuss them all here, but there is no single way to characterize or defeat psychological abuse. Um, the history of humanity is built on abuse. Abuse builds on deceit. The nature of deceit is deceiving. The psychology plays a role, and the whole thing is mind wrecking by itself, just thinking about it. And psychologically can be emotionally very afflicting. So we must continue to hope for a better world, towards work towards the evolution of consciousness, and to recognize the various things. These talks contribute some understanding to scenarios of psychological abuse, and places the topic in the context of complex systems and artificial intelligence. Future work includes possibly a framework to manage complexity uh, designed for psychological abuse, for understanding and tackling psychological abuse. This could be a very important contribution. So we have frameworks to tackle complexity in various fields, in systems, in design, organizations, but we could use one of these tools for understanding and addressing psychological abuse. How long before psychological abuse and misuse of information continue to go unnoticed? So we need to learn how to identify them. And anyone interested in developing such a framework or in collaborating on this topic in any other way is very welcome to get in touch with me. I look forward to comments and maybe have a Q&A session or a chat. Get in touch anytime. Thank you. Bye.